Hi, I'm Dr. Rebecca Heiss. Thanks for being here today to explore fear-less diversity. I have to start off with a little bit of bad news, and that is we all are stuck with lousy brains. See, our brains, they're not built for this world. They're built for this one. It's a world where we lived with about 150 or so other individuals, and we lived like that for 200,000 plus years in this scarce and dangerous environment. Right up until the last 200 or so, when this starts happening. And we have this explosion in technology and populations, and suddenly we look around and we're surrounded by 8 billion other individuals. And we're all globally connected. So there's just one small problem with that. See, while technology and populations and culture can all exponentially increase, biology's time frame, well, it's a little bit slower. So biologically, our brains are stuck way back here, living in a sparse, dangerous, scary environment. We have Stone Age brains trying to live in a modern environment, which means there are a few mismatches. This Stone Age brain is being bombarded with information, because as you might have realized, today information is hitting us really fast at a rate of about 400 billion bits per second. That's a crazy amount of information to process. And so what happens is we can only consciously process about 2,000 bits per second, which means if you want to do the math with me, that 99.9999999% of the time, we're operating from our subconscious, from our shortcuts, instincts, stories that might not actually match very well with the environment that we're now living in. And the easiest place to see these stories, these instincts, is in how we process fear. So this survey was done, about a year and a half ago, asking Americans, what is your number one fear? What do you guys think it was? Rejection? Failure? Death? Public speaking? No, it was actually none of those. Are you ready for what it actually was? The number one fear of Americans? It's snakes. Snakes? Are you kidding me? Snakes? That doesn't make any sense. Well, not logically anyway. But when you remember that, we have ancestral brains, and for our ancestors, wandering around the savannah trying not to die, that was something they absolutely should be afraid of. So while you're not likely to step on a snake wandering through the shopping mall today, it makes sense that your brain is constantly looking for them. Now, if we were conscious, cognitive, thinking beings, which I like to think we all are, what should our number one fear be? Now, maybe rejection, public speaking, failure, those are all good ones. I'm going to add one more to the list that I didn't say before. Are you ready for it? Try not to scream. Yeah, the new Krispy Kreme Double Down with extra fries and a shake. Oh my gosh. Wait, why should we be afraid of that? Well, simple. What's the number one thing we die of? Heart disease. That's the number one killer. That should look like the laser beam of an AK-47 pointed directly at our hearts. And yet, if you're anything like me, you're looking at it probably like wiping away a little drool going, oh my gosh, it looks so good. Can I get one of those now? Why does our brain crave things that kill us? If our brain was built for this world, kale would taste like that. I assure you, if you haven't tried kale recently, it still doesn't. Because our brains aren't built for this world. They're certainly not built for the modern workplace. So think about in ancestral times. You might be out working, right? Picking a few berries here and there. Ooh, lovely day. Delicious berries. And then you hear a little rustling. Maybe see something, bushes moving in your periphery. What should you immediately do? I hope you at least look, if not, just get out of Dodge, right? You gotta check it out. Now, luckily today in the modern workplace, we don't have anything distracting us or pulling our periphery. Oh, right. And our brain is screaming, snake, it's a snake, it might be a tiger, it's a snake, oh my gosh, what do we do? No, it's not a snake, it's Kathy. She's just coming up to check on us to see if we have our sales report in. It's fine, we like Kathy. But our brains don't know that. Our brain's first response is to fall to fear, which is why we stay afraid of the other. So I grew up in a fairly non-traditional household where several of my siblings are Black. And I'm walking my youngest brother, Johnny, who happens to be Black, home from baseball practice one day. He's probably, 8 or so at the time. I'm 23-ish. And a cop car pulls up alongside of us, unrolls his window, looks out at me and says, "Ma'am, you okay?" "Yeah, I'm fine. Should you not be a little more concerned about this little boy who does not look like he belongs with me, that I'm dragging along right now?" And it got me wondering, why is it that we so fear the other? Anyone who doesn't look like us or act like us or operate under the same rules and regulations as us. Now, I'm not faulting the cop, but I'm faulting something else. Our lousy brains. See, remember that in ancestral times, we lived with people that looked like us, acted like us, and operated under the same rules and regulations as us. And anyone who didn't, well, they weren't coming over to borrow a cup of sugar. They were real threats. Scary, dangerous individuals that might steal all of our resources and we may not survive. So, to this day, while all of us know, we're completely aware of the research that shows that diverse populations, diverse teams, they're more creative, they're more engaged, they come out with more accurate solutions to problems. We know all of this. And yet diversity initiatives continue to fail because we haven't addressed this. And so to our ancestral brains, we're saying, well, that person is dangerous, they're scary, they're disease-ridden. Now, I'm not saying we say that consciously, of course we don't. But subconsciously, that shortcut, we're constantly falling to fear. Now, if you're like me, you're probably saying, yeah, okay, I get the research, that's not what I do. Fine. But if a stranger walks through that door right now who doesn't look like you, each and every one of us is going to experience a stress response, completely subconscious and mostly out of your control. So your body first gets flooded with cortisol. That's the main stress hormone. And the number one job of cortisol is to shut down this portion of your brain, the thinking frontal lobe, where you're making conscious cognitive choices. Which means you're reliant on those shortcuts, those instincts, those subconscious processing mechanisms that say, fear the other. So, if you think you're like me and you're like, yeah, okay, I know, but I don't operate from that. That's not who I am. Great. Let's do a little test. Ready? Quickly, I want you to picture a felon. The very first image that comes to your mind. Did he look like this? Did any of you picture Martha Stewart? Okay. This doesn't make us bad people. This makes us reliant on shortcuts. Those instincts. Subconscious shortcuts that, well, no longer serve us today. Don't worry, I'm going to give you another chance. Are you ready? Picture a CEO. Was it Bezos or someone that looked like him? Did any of us picture Ursula Burns? Or any woman? Or any person of color? Again, this is really important. It doesn't make us bad people. It makes us reliant on shortcuts. And those shortcuts appear in any number of spaces, sometimes affecting us in ways that we might not even be aware of. For example, I grew up on Disney. So I learned from a very young age that powerful women, they're what? Evil? What? No, they're not evil villains. What are you talking about? Even Disney. Now, wait a second. I don't think this is a conscious story that Disney tried to weave in. But ancestrally, let's think about the story we tell about women. Women are valued for, well, their ability to reproduce in ancestral times. And so if a woman has aged past her reproductive capabilities, she wouldn't be powerful or valuable in ancestral society. And yet today, when you look at these Disney characters, they're obviously a little bit older and, well, if they have power, well, they must have come about it in an evil, witchy way. I don't think that's the story that we mean to be telling. And guys, I'm not trying to leave you out of it either. Listen, you're not even in the Disney movie unless you're a prince. Why? Because we value you for strength and status. And that plays out in really interesting ways today as well. See, across the American population, only 14.5% of men are over 6 foot. But when you look At Fortune 500 CEOs, that number leaps to 58%. Something's going on here. Either tall people just inherently make better leaders, which as a tall person myself, I like to think is true. But I'm inclined to think that's probably not the case. I don't think you have to be over 6 foot to run a tech company. So that leads me to the other conclusion, which is that we're still relying on these shortcuts, these stories, to put people into positions of power or keep them out based upon irrational ancient fears. Now, let me say that we have gotten better, right? Like we've got Wonder Woman now. All right. Except one problem. See, I don't know about you, but last time I went to war, I did not remove clothing or take down my hair first. See, often, even when we mean to empower, we're just falling back to the same stories. Wonder Woman is powerful because she's young and beautiful. Things that our ancestral brain says give women power. Okay, so let me take a step back from race and gender for just a second and talk about another stereotype. Now, this happens to be my favorite stereotype because, well, I'm not blonde. But you know the stereotype. I'm not saying it's true, but you know it, right? Like, dumb and ditzy and... All right. So I want you to think about some celebrity blondes. The stereotypical blonde. Who do you come up with? Pamela Anderson, Jessica Simpson, Reese Witherspoon, Alicia Silverstone. Any others? Think about it. So I've asked this question to hundreds of thousands of people at this point, and I've gotten the exact same answers every single time. This one sometimes comes up. And yet, I have never, in all of these times, experienced this answer. Are you ready for it? Hold your horses. Or any male for that matter. Matthew McConaughey? Are you kidding me? All right. See, I don't think that we're biased against blondes. I think we're biased against women. And guys, again, I'm not picking on you. This is gender independent. Females, we give the exact same answers. The problem is we don't realize these subconscious associations that are so powerful. See, you don't have to be a dumb blonde. You have to be a dumb blonde who's also female. If we don't pay attention to how dangerous these subconscious associations are, we're bound to repeat them. And the scary thing is, you don't have to believe in a story in order to act from within it. So I'm going to tell you a story right now. I'm going to tell you that square A and that square B, they're the same color. Do you believe me? Okay, it's true, I swear it. And in fact, I'm going to prove it to you right now. You can see that now, right? That square A and that square B, they have the exact same gray. So the same way that we know that people who look different from us aren't dangerous, we know that blondes aren't dumb, we know that females can make excellent leaders, we know these truths consciously. We're completely fine with these truths. So I'm going to ask you to hold on to that truth, right? Hold on to it. Uh-oh. Did you lose it? It's easy to lose these conscious truths because, well, our subconscious brain takes over and just tells us how it is. Like in this case, our subconscious brain knows that that yellow cylinder is a three-dimensional object and it's casting a shadow. So B, the tile B is in a shadow. Obviously, it must be lighter than A. Our brain knows this because that's how it's always been. And yet, even though we consciously know the truth, it's hard to hang onto it. It's easy to miss what we're not looking for in these subconscious associations. In fact, it's so easy, I'm going to play a quick clip for you just to challenge your brain a little bit further. So pay close attention.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Why, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, Arrest Lady Smythe.
But how did you know?
Madam, as any horticulturist will tell you, one does not plant petunias until May is out. Take her away.
Sorry, madam.
It's just a matter of observation. The real question is, how observant were you?
Ba-da-ba-da-ba-ba. Anyone notice the 21 changes that just occurred? Don't feel bad. You're about to see the exact same clip, once again from a slightly different perspective.
And action.
Clearly, somebody in this room murdered Lord Smythe, who, at precisely 3:34 this afternoon, was brutally bludgeoned to death with a blunt instrument. I want each of you to tell me your whereabouts at precisely the time that this dastardly deed took place.
I was polishing the brass in the master bedroom.
I was buttering his lordship's scones below stairs, sir.
Well, I was planting my petunias in the potting shed.
Constable, arrest Lady Smythe.
It's easy to miss things we're not looking for. And our brain just defaults to that subconscious not looking for it mode all the time. Which means often we don't see the water that we swim in. David Foster Wallace gave a brilliant commencement speech in which he told a little story about two young fish swimming along in the ocean and an older fish who comes swimming by and sort of tips his fin at the two young fish and says, "Hello, boys. How's the water today?" And the two young fish swim along for a while longer, and finally one turns to the other and says, "Dude, what's water?" It's easy to miss what we're not looking for, and when we're surrounded by a world that's built for us, that's normal, we don't see it. The water that we swim in may be toxic to the fish next to us, but we don't notice because our water is fine. That's the concept behind privilege. Now, I'm hesitant to even use the word privilege because I know barriers come up, fear comes up when I say privilege. But let me give you different language for that because privilege is nothing more than a tailwind. I'm a cyclist, okay? So, all right, I'm not really a cyclist. I use this. I hate cycling. It is like the bane of my existence, but I do it once a year. It's a big event. Every year I do a 100-mile cycle. And this is me maybe a dozen years ago. I'm at my first big event and you can see I'm at the 50-mile turnaround and I feel great. I'm like, this is a complete joke. I absolutely overtrained for this. And then I turned around. Yeah, I threw up 3 times on the way back because I simply hadn't noticed that for the whole first 50 miles, I'd had a tailwind. That's privilege. That's the water that we don't see we're swimming in. So how does privilege affect you, not just individually, but as a society, in your businesses, in your places of work? Let me show you this small example as maybe a warning video.
Nice. Okay, Noel, we try now. One to your hand. 2 black.
2 black.
Yeah.
So what I'll
Come
do?
again. Come again, Sashi.
No.
Nah, you 2 back over way.
What I have to do to get
What you have to do
this is how ritualist thing is.
Yeah.
I have to use that piece of white. Let's say a napkin and a shoulder again.
Again. Put your napkin again.
Napkin again.
Right, put your hand out.
What's it called on my hand?
Man, the black man getting fight down all over.
Okay, so this was a company that was really innovative, designed concepts out of the UK. They had a brand new great technology where you stick your hand underneath this infrared beam comes down, it reflects off and it sets off the sensor and boom, dispenses soap. They tested all of their employees, then shipped this technology worldwide. There's just one small problem. See, infrared doesn't reflect off of dark skin, it gets absorbed. And so it never sets off the sensor and never dispenses soap. What population or demographic are you completely overlooking in your own company, in your own products or services? If for no other reason you want to make sure that you're thinking about diversity, do it for the money. Band-Aid has been around for over 100 years, and it wasn't until the year 2020 that they stopped and thought, well, wait a second, why don't we cover the $1.2 billion market gap that is people with different skin tones? Again, the water that we swim in. Many of us who look like me probably didn't even realize that, oh yeah, Band-Aid just matches us. That's privilege. So I think for too long, we've been fighting this fight wrong. We've been trying to seek equality. And equality is the assumption that everybody's benefiting from the same supports. But in reality, that's just not the case. See, when we take a policy and apply it equally, for example, wear a mask. Well, it hits different populations differently. Now, I can wear a skull mask and a Compton hat and try and look dangerous and walk into any bank and nobody gives me a second look. But if my brother does it, totally different reaction. So equality simply isn't the answer. And then think of other populations like the deaf population or hard of hearing. If I put a mask on and you rely on lips, well, you're in deep trouble if you're trying to understand what I'm saying. So that moves us into this space of equity. And equity is, well, everybody's getting the supports they need, but there's a problem here too. Who decides who gets what support? This is where concepts come in like the Executive Leadership Council and Women's Leadership Councils. And I think these are important spaces, safe spaces for populations that have often been underserved to get together and talk about, well, issues that are really important to them in safe spaces. But who does this leave out? Well, often white men aren't invited. And the result is, well, white men right now tend to be mostly in power. So they're not hearing about these issues in order to do anything about them. I think in order to move beyond equality and equity, we have to get to a space of justice. And justice is the removal of the barriers that prevented everyone from having an equal opportunity to begin with. To me, justice begins right here, on an individual basis, changing our brains, changing the fears that we have that are associated with the other. See, we all think that we can just rise to the level of our expectations, that we can be the inclusive leaders that we all want to be. But in reality, we fall. We fall to the level of our training. And remember that our training is all about fear. So, here's the good news. The good news is that our brains are highly trainable. Think about it. Do you remember the first time that you drove a car and your hands are 10 and 2 and you're trying to look at the pedestrians and the speedometer and the pedals and the whole gear shifting and oh my gosh. Now if you drive, you're like one hand on the wheel, maybe talking on your phone, talking to the kids in the back, messing with your podcast. You're hardly paying attention. That's amazing. What that means is that you've trained your brain to drive for you. If you can train your brain to do a complex task like driving, you certainly can train it to override some of these subconscious stories and shortcuts that no longer serve us today. The second bit of really important information is that our brains are really powerful. So, hands down, my favorite experiment of all time. A group of housekeepers, bias check. You guys all just pictured white men, right? Okay. Group of housekeepers split into two separate groups. One group is told nothing. The other group is simply told, hey, do you know that when you're cleaning, you actually are meeting the Surgeon General's requirement for exercise? That's it. It's the only difference between the two groups. And yet, after 4 weeks' time, there was a massive change. Now, each group wore these nifty-difty wristwatches, which allowed them to track exertion level, heart rate, diet. All of that was factored out of the analysis. And yet, 4 weeks later, the group that was simply told that they were meeting the Surgeon General's requirement for exercise had lower weight, lower body fat, lower blood pressure, lower waist-to-hip ratio, and a lower body mass index. 4 weeks' time. I read that study and I was like, you are an athlete. Thanks for not laughing. I mean, I'm also a bit of a skeptic. I was like, no, there is no way that just mindset Is the difference between lower weight and blood pressure? No way. So I dig into this research and I find more research that supports this. And I find more research that supports this. And ultimately, I have to come to the conclusion that we're a bit too dismissive of the placebo effect. Placebo, just your brain telling you, yeah, that's exactly it. It's your brain telling you a story and your brain believes the story you tell it. In fact, it's one of the reasons that we're having a pharmaceutical crisis in this country. In order for a drug to be passed, it has to meet 90% efficacy. That's good. You want your drugs to work. The problem is that placebos typically come in at about 80% efficacy. That's not much difference between a biologically active substance and your brain believing you're taking a biologically active substance. Your brain believes the stories you tell it. What stories are you telling? Imagine how those stories are manifesting in your own body and in your relationships with others. I believe we all deserve to be telling better stories. So here's the solution. We just have to retrain our brains. Seems easy enough, right? Well, let's start with this. I want you to sit quietly, to close your eyes, turn off your cell phone, get away from your kids, your partners. Take a deep breath and just listen. What do you suppose you'll hear? Here comes the chatter, right? Your subconscious is going to start producing thoughts. Thoughts that come up as, you're a failure, you're an imposter, reject that person, they're scary, that's dangerous, you've got all these things to do. What? Yeah, it turns out 70% of the internal chatter that we have is negative. We have to start addressing those internal stories if we want to have any hope in changing the way our brains operate under fear. I tend to be a meditative failure. Let me tell you what I mean by that. I tried meditating, did the whole quiet, close eyes, take deep breaths, and all the voices come in, right? Just like with you all, when you just tried that. Well, that's not failing. That actually means that you're doing it. When you're hearing the voices that come up, that's the only time you can actually change them. That's why we measure anything in business is this helpful? Is this useful? Or should I change this? Now you have an opportunity to begin testing, deciding, is this a story I want to keep or is this one that's holding me back? I personally need alarm clocks for this because I have to monitor myself throughout the day. So here's how awareness alarms work. Any of you set an alarm clock to wake you up in the mornings? You might notice that you start to wake up a few minutes before that alarm clock goes off. That's because you've trained your brain to become conscious at a particular time. That's great. We're going to use that exact same concept while you're already awake. So here's how it works. I want you to set 5 alarms to go off throughout the day at regular intervals. When the alarm clock goes off, simply turn it off, take a deep breath, and check in with yourself. Ask yourself this question. What am I afraid of? What am I afraid of? Right now, in this moment, am I operating from fear? And if I am, how might I change that story? And even if I can't change it, well, what's the best thing that could happen? See, our brains are wired to think automatically negatively about the whole situation. It's why we're worried about the rustling behind us. That's important because we might become tiger meat. So our brains adapted to have these automatic negative thoughts, but we have to learn to teach our brains that this isn't a dangerous environment. We're relatively safe. So what's the best thing that could come of this situation? The second thing we can do to begin working with our biology rather than against it is to create a common external enemy. The best way I know how to describe this is by using a sports analogy. So I happen to be a huge Boston Red Sox fan. So at every opportunity, I'm going to Fenway and I am hugging strangers. We're like buying beer for one another. We're immediately one. It's not because we don't see race or we don't see gender or we don't see these things. It's because we have a bigger focus. The enemy, the other, those losers, the Yankees. Yeah, when you have a clear, common external enemy, what happens is it begins to bind those tribal bonds of belonging. And suddenly, all those internal factors that really felt like squabbles and things that we needed to discuss disappear because our focus It's on something bigger. Major corporations have figured this out. And so, Burger King, who's their common enemy? McDonald's. Coca-Cola? Pepsi. You see how this works. So here's the question. Who is your clear, common, external enemy? Now, I really like this concept, but demonizing an entire corporation or entire association or entire group of individuals, maybe isn't the best solution. So, like, for example, if Derek Jeter from the Yankees had wanted to play for us, I would welcome him, frankly. So how can we take this to the next level? I think we can create an abstract common enemy. So I'm a bit of a klutz, and I ended up in the ER maybe 5 years ago with a broken foot. And while I'm sitting there waiting, as you do in the ER, I noticed that there's a gentleman who's fixing a door. Well, I like to talk, so I kind of like hobble up to him and like, hey, what you doing? And for all intents and purposes, he should have said to me, I'm fixing the door. But that's not what he said. He said, ma'am, at this hospital, it's our mission to reduce patient pain. When patients are pushed through that door, the door sticks and it jars them a little bit. So I'm just here reducing patient pain. Jaw meet floor. How powerful is it when your surgeons, your maintenance workers, your anesthesiologists, your doctors, your nurses, you're all united, driven by a single, clear, common, external enemy? You heard it. Patient pain. Now, I know this feels a little backwards, right? Because we're used to thinking about mission and vision and values. Those are the lovely berries on that bush that we're out picking. Oh, delicious mission. Oh, I love values. Well, what happens when we hear a little wrestling? The whole team's focus goes from here to right there. So let's control this. If we can control this clear, common, external enemy, then we can bring our mission, vision, and values as weapons along to fight it. Who is your common enemy? Now, once again, this probably feels uncomfortable because we're used to thinking about things in the positive sense, mission, vision, and values, but that's not what our brain operates from. It's kind of like having to brush your teeth with the opposite hand. It's uncomfortable, it's weird, it's different, and our brain hates different. Well, if we're trying to incorporate diversity, if we're trying to lose our fear, we need more different. But that's not what our brain loves. Our brain lives in really two worlds, black and white here. Over here, where our brains are happy, content, safe, feeling good, lots of abundance, and we're just doing everything the way we've always done it. Our brain likes this space. Now, if we dip our pinky toe over here into discomfort, our brain leaps from here to, we're gonna die! No, we're not. That's not the world that we live in. Now, this was an important shortcut for our ancestors because discomfort really did mean death was right on their heels. Discomfort equals death. Well, you weren't a little bit cold and a little bit hungry, you might actually freeze to death or starve. So that was an important shortcut, but today, there's a very big difference between complete comfort and death, and most of life takes place in the in-between, in that gray area. Now, you wouldn't show up to the starting line of an ultra marathon having never trained your body, and yet you're showing up every day to live in a world that you haven't trained your brain for. We have to train our brains to be more comfortable in that discomfort. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to do some discomfort challenges. Today, for example, on my way here, I stopped at my favorite local coffee shop and I rolled up, ordered my coffee, got up to the window, and turned to my barista and said, yeah, can I get 10% off that order? My heart started pounding, my mouth went dry, I started sweating profusely. Why? What's the worst thing that's going to happen? Now, if you don't think this is difficult, I challenge you to try it. It's terrifying. Asking for a 10% discount, absolutely terrifying, because what's going to happen? Oh my God, she's going to reject me. If she rejects me, I die. No, I don't. It's fine. The worst case scenario is she says no. And then I pay my $10.99 or whatever you pay for coffee, and I drive off. Nothing bad happens. And so then my brain says, hey, nothing bad happened. I had a stress response, and I didn't die. we start recording that footage. So now tomorrow, I go out and I read a poem out loud on the street corner. People start giving me weird looks and my heart starts pounding again. And I'm going, oh my gosh, this is so awkward. What am I doing out here? And it's fine. I don't die again. And my brain once again says, oh, that stress response, you didn't need it. Everything was fine. Now, when discomfort finds me and I'm not seeking it, now my brain has all of this footage to go back to. I start to feel this and I'm like, whew, okay, I know what this is. This is a stress response. We're fine. We don't need it. I can slow my breathing. I can slow my heart rate. And now I can operate here from my conscious mind, not these subconscious shortcuts and instincts and biases. I don't need to operate from here because I know we're safe. We're fine. We're not going to die. Everything will be okay. I think this is the most important training that we all should be doing. In fact, I think it's so important. I want to invite you to do it with me right now. You guys ready? Here's what I need you to do. Wherever you are, stand up, stretch out. We're about to have a 10-second dance party. That's right. Don't even look around you. You might be totally alone. That should be easy. You might be in the middle of your office. Great, even better. So here's what's going to happen. A lot of you are like, okay, I'll just do this. It's cool. Just dance like, live right here. It's fine. Oh no, I need to see your biggest, boldest, like jam out moves. The whole point is for you to hear this little voice. The little voice that says, dude, your hips don't move like that. And for you to say, watch me. You guys ready? 10 seconds on the clock. Let's boogie. Yeah, you get 10 seconds of me dancing, baby. Woo! That's gotta be 10 seconds, right? Yeah. Woo. Okay, stop. Stop. Whew. How'd it feel? Wait a second. I think I'm seeing smiles. That's weird. We might have to do that again. That was supposed to be uncomfortable. Why are you smiling? My guess is that you're smiling because we all just endured that together as a group. You probably feel this much closer to the people that are watching and doing this with you. Why? I gave you a clear common enemy. You're welcome. Sometimes as leaders, we have to step into that place of being a clear common enemy and saying, guys, this is going to be really uncomfortable, but I'm with you. We're doing this together. Let's boogie. Finally, we have to be willing to be the non-expert. That's hard because if we want to be real leaders, we're usually experts, right? We're coming in, we're saying, okay, guys, I'm willing to take charge. I'm willing to embrace this discomfort and say, this is going to be tough. We're in it. Let's go. Let's do it. And we have to show up as a non-expert? That's what I'm asking. Because the reality is we often can only see our truth. And if we want to be fearless in approaching diversity, we have to recognize that it's just our truth. That's just the way we see it. And if we step into the shoes of someone else, we'll see the different truth. Just because I'm wrong doesn't mean you're right. And just because you're right doesn't mean I'm wrong. In fact, we can have multiple truths, especially when we start to look at how we define the water that we're swimming in. As non-experts, we should always be asking, how do we define expertise? How do we define leadership? How do we define anything in the water that we swim in? I'm a big fan of leadership books. I'm a bit of a junkie. And so I thought, it would be really interesting to explore how we define leadership. After all, I know one perspective because I took the top 10 leadership books for the past 10 years. And like a dork, I ran a little basic analysis on them because that's what I do. And it turns out two really important factors emerged. One, I definitely need to change the cover of my book to make sure it incorporates red because huge, important factor here. The second thing that I found fascinating was that 90%, over 90% of these books were written by white men. Now, here's the thing. White males, I am not trying to pick on you. These are great books. We absolutely should be reading these books. And that's one truth. What about reading outside of this? Because we'll never see a different definition of leadership if we're only reading from one perspective. All right, So now that we are in that beginner's mindset, I'm going to ask you all as experts, I'm pretty sure you can count to 10, so I think this should be a pretty easy exercise, to just work through this with me, all right? I'm going to ask you to count the number of F's, letter F's, in that sentence. Quickly as you can. Ready? Go. What do you think? 2? 3? 4? 6? Anybody get 7? This is tricky. Most of us can pretty quickly get this. Finished, files, scientific. No problem. But most of us at least miss one of these 7. There's a reason that they're highlighted for me, because every time I give this presentation, I miss one. Why? This is a simple task. As experts in counting, we should be able to do this. As experts in leadership, as experts in the water that we're swimming in. Oh, it's because we have a rule. We have a rule in place, and that rule, just like every other subconscious rule, sometimes gets it wrong. Like finished, files, scientific, no problem, because F says, there's no F there. It's irrelevant. We dismiss it. We don't even see it. How many things are you dismissing because they're outside of the water that you swim in? How many things do you just not see because they don't fit your rules? I love this saying by Brene Brown, and so I have to give her credit. But I think this is the summary of what being a non-expert means. Don't show up with your ego. Show up not to be right, but with a willingness to get it right. That allows us to see multiple perspectives, multiple definitions, multiple truths, and start to override these shortcuts, these stories, these biases that we all carry. So my father was a minister. And yeah, I know, the association is really strong there, right? Preacher's kids, we go one way or another. I'll let you guys figure that story out. But I spent any number of years sitting in church, and I remember a single sermon. It went like this. He stood in front of his congregation with a bottle of water, and he started shaking it, and the water's going everywhere, and I'm like, whoa, this is cool. And he asked his congregation a very simple question. He asked them, why does the water spill out? Seemed pretty obvious to me, right? Like you're shaking the bottle. Of course, that wasn't the answer. The answer was the water spills out because it's water that's inside. What's inside of you? When life shakes you, which inevitably it will, it is. What's spilling out of you? And I think the answer for all of us is fear. Fear spills out in the form of instincts, stories, biases, shortcuts that we don't mean to be telling. So as you leave here today, I want to encourage each and every one of you, challenge you to become just a bit more fearless. Now you'll notice that less is in parentheses, and that's for good reason. I don't want you jumping into the cage of a hungry tiger because you're like, I'm fearless. No, fearless is a terrible idea. But actively and consciously sorting your fears. Actual hungry tiger? I should be afraid of that. Somebody who looks different from me. That's a shortcut. That's a story that needs to be overridden. We deserve to tell better stories. Imagine who you will become as you let go of those ancient fears. You make room for more as you fear less. Thank you so much.